Alrighty, so for 8.1, we're going to populate the form when the user clicks edit. Okay, so now we get to lean into a lot of the infrastructure that we've built, right? So at this point, we have completed the delete functionality. We're handling that in the table renderer, which really makes sense to have it there because that, well, we're doing the logic of the delete in the app. This is just a good review, but the handling of the UI is in table render. Now, when we think about the edit, let's think through what we're going to do, because there's different approaches that could have been done here. Like one approach you might have seen is when somebody hits the edit, that it opens up these fields to be edited. That's one of the ways I've seen it. But in our case, because we have this form already set up, and it is used and it already has all the code to handle it, a very more common that I've seen is when you hit edit, it just brings in the values. It resets, or in this case, populates would be the word I would use because it's the function we're going to write. It actually populates these inputs. But in order to do that, we got to do a little bit of work. But it's a lot less work than we had to do to hit the delete because we get to kind of lean into some of what we wrote. Okay, so let's start by doing this. In our table renderer, all we had here was the console.log, right? That's all we had because at this point, if our target list if the target class list contains edit and the type of current callbacks on edit is a function. So in other words, we're capturing for these two conditions. If this is true, then this is where we would call the edit. And you might go, well, wait a minute, up here we did all this, we called the show, delete, confirm. Well, in this case, we're not going to need to do that piece, but what we are going to do is come back up here and edit this or update the form. So we're calling the function to actually edit, which remember is living right now in the app.js inside of here. Okay. So, but before we do that, I'm going to put a few things to comment here because before we call it, it would make sense to clear any pending delete confirmations, okay, that we had before we edit, because maybe the user changed their mind, right? So we already have something that does this. We could just call, at this point, let's say before we call our edit, let's actually just call our reset, okay? And now, right, let's call the actual edit. Okay, so this is where we reference the module variable, and now we go on edit, okay, and then we're going to pass it the ID. Okay, so the ID that is on the edit. Remember where these come from? This is always good to remember because of the way we wrote them, right? In this case, where is that? There it is, right? So we have that data ID on here, which is really very helpful to have, okay? And it was passed, right? It was passed to us. We got it off the event that was fired when the user clicked. And now, and this is where you really start to see the benefit of the way this has been designed, because now when the user clicks, we don't have to have a different setup necessarily for the event listener, because the event listener in this case is handled at the table level. So we really see the benefit here, okay? So now we call that. Okay, so that's the first part. And now what's going to happen here, as soon as our condition is met, that they'd actually have a function and we have a class list edit, we reset and then we call this. So at this point we're done with the table, and let's move over to the app.js. And so in our app.js we want to find this edit, right? Because we did the delete, we handled it on the delete. So here, right, and in this case, right, actually it's week 8 we ended up, okay? So what do we need to do here? So this is kind of equivalent to what we did on the delete, but on the delete we were looking for the index. So what we want to have here is we want to have that entire object back, because we only needed the index to actually call the splice to delete. Now we want to have the actual object. So instead of find index, we'll just do a find, but with a similar thing, which is looking through, iterating over the carbon footprint entries. Okay. So down here, what we'll do, and let's actually, I think I have some content for this, so let's go grab it real quick, right? So we're going to find, so here, we will find, the first thing we'll do is find the object, entry object in our in-memory, and this is key, right? So what do we know about that? So first, let's set up a variable, entry to edit. Okay, this is something, again, variable name, we choose what we want. Carbon footprint entries dot find, like find index, has a callback. Okay. Now in this case, right, this is we declare what we want each, in this case, object to, what's the block scope for this callback, and we will say entry. Again, we could have called it anything we wanted, but entry to me makes the most sense. Okay. So, so now it's going to look through all of them, and again, it's the same condition that are the test, right? So remember we talked about it tests for, so each one it's going to say, hey, is the entry ID triple equal to the ID? Now be very careful here, because it can just make sense to do equals, and I said this on the other one, and I'm going to say it again because it's a very common mistake to make. Because this will set this entry ID to whatever's passed in. This will actually say, is it equal? And when it's equal, then it's returning, and once it meets the test case, then we have the variable block scope that we can use, our entry to edit. Okay, so actually let's test this right now. We have enough code in place at this point to see this work. Okay. So let's come back over here. I believe this is true, right? So let's go look at our sources, and we could look at our app.js, and we could put a block, or sorry, a breakpoint right here, okay? And we could hit edit, okay? So we hit edit. Oh, I must have needed to refresh. Let's try it again. Okay, so let's hit edit. I'm just making sure I have the right one open, because edit should have actually fired. Let me make sure I wasn't coding. No, I was coding the right one. It's coding week 8. It's always a little bit of a mystery when it's like, okay, because this, oh, duh. Oh, I love it. I was actually on the edit. On the delete. So here is where I want to be. I want to be on here. Okay, so now hit this. Now it stops. Okay, so now we're going to do that find. Right, so the first time through, and you can see here's the first object. Now I don't only have 2 entries, 2 objects in my in-memory array. So now I'm going to do the test. Right, and so now it's like, okay. Okay, so now. So this then becomes that entry, okay? And in this case, sorry, that object. So now we have the entire object, right? And now we'll reset, but we know that there's really nothing to reset. Where is that table? 1209, because we're actually coding it right now. 209. Oh, that's in here. Oh, yeah. So actually we can get rid of that, and because we're actually coding it now. I was just looking at this. Okay, so now that we have that, all right, so now what we want to do here back in our app.js, now that we have and we know that this edit works, that it finds the object that we need. So now what do we want to do? Because we don't just start boom, populating anything yet. We want to make sure. So if we have an entry to edit, right? So, and again, we're testing for truthing it. In other words, does it exist? Okay. If it exists, right, and I'm going to grab this here, then we're going to populate the form. Okay, so in this case, if this is true, right? If we have an entry to edit, then we're going to call the form. Now, by the way, this method does not exist yet. We're going to code it right now, and it's going to be populate form for edit. Again, naming things what they're doing really helps you kind of reason about things, and we're going to pass it the entire object, right? By passing it the entire object, then we can do, and you'll see this, what we'll do next, okay? But remember, because we're dealing with the UI, we generally will call after everything that. And then we could also say, hey, you know what? Console.log here, just so we know for now. Editing entry ID. Okay, just so we have it in case we need to actually do a little. Okay, and then we'll say form populated. Well, it hasn't been yet. We haven't called it. Okay, so now that we have this in place, now let's go over to the form handler. So now in form handler, right, this is a new function we're going to write. Okay, so we know we've written some helper functions here. We're going to lean into the logic here because in this case we got the radio values, so now we want to set them. So we'll look at that as we write this one. And so let's write this one right before the get form inputs. So again, this one is going to be called from the app.js, so we have to export it. Okay, populate form edits. Okay, is equal to a function. And what is going to be passed to it is the entry. Okay, so we know it's getting that entire object. So now comes the part that actually is not that hard to do, because we already have, in this case, a couple of things already set up in this form handler. But before we do that, we just say entry. Oh, yeah, and I actually didn't show this. I forgot. So actually, if you look on the index, and I probably may have covered this already in attendance, but in here, there's actually in the form right at the beginning. I have to find it. I was in here earlier looking at this. Right, there's this input. Okay, input type entry, the ID itself. So this gives us access to an input type that is right now hidden. Okay, so we will lean into this concept with the code we're about to write, and we'll say entry. Right. Oh, yeah, actually, we need a reference to that. That's right. I forgot that. So we'll do that next because I realized I didn't actually set that up. .value equal to entry.id. Okay. So this is good for me to remember that we actually do need to have this. So where is this located, right? So did I already include it in this one? You know what, I didn't. Hold on a second. Okay, I had forgotten to put those in the instructions, so just do this. So here's your, you get reference to the hidden entry input that I just showed you. So you set up the input. Again, because it's off the carbon footprint, you query the form, and we're looking for, because we're selecting query selector, we're specifically do the pound sign to look for that ID. And then also we need access in here to the submit button, so we go ahead and set that up as well. So these are the things we need at the top of the form handler. Okay, my bad for forgetting them. Okay, so now here, so now that we've set that, so okay, now we've set that value. Now we have, right, we want to set the household members input dot value. So its value, its form, remember this is when we reference this, and we could go look at it, right? Matter of fact, it wouldn't hurt, right? So this is the input right here, okay? So we're going to set its value, which again is really not that bad to do, because all we have to do is reference its value and now say it's going to be equal to whatever was passed in for the object and its household members, okay, whatever that is. So now we're going to say home square foot input dot value. Oh, that's right. So here we have, that's right. So here there's two things, right? So if actually it's value, okay, is going to be equal to entry dot home square footage, right? And then is apartment. That's right. The is apartment one is, in this case, it's checked, is going to be equal to whatever is in the entry dot is apartment. Okay. So this is setting here these two values right here. Okay. So if it's checked, and we could go look at that attribute that's in there, but we know that we've handled this kind of stuff before. But now we come to the check boxes, or sorry, the radio buttons. So how did we handle setting these radio buttons? Because we didn't want to go through, and we wanted to have a simple way to just iterate over and check each one. When we found the equivalent, then set it. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to write a little helper function. So instead of get, we're going to say set selected radio value. Okay, there we go. So this is going to be a function. We'll write this next, and we're going to pass it the radios, and we're going to pass it whatever is in our object for, in this case, diet type. And we'll go ahead and, matter of fact, okay, so we're also going to do this for food packaging radios, and the entry on this would be food packaging. Okay, cool. So now let's actually go write the little helper function, because right here, right, so where we were setting its value before we stored it into local, grabbing the values so that we could build up our local store, our in-memory, and ultimately our local storage. Now we just kind of do the opposite. So now we set its value equal to a function, but in this case we're going to have to pass it two things, right? So we are going to pass it, in this case, we're going to pass it. Now, what we call these things, right? Again, we can say more, we don't have to specify each of them because we're running this function twice. So we want this somewhat unique, or generic would be the better way I could say it. Okay. So we're going to say pass it the radio buttons, and then pass it the value to set. Okay. So we're passing it this, right? And then we're so remember the commas, and it does, how about this be a function? So we're passing it two arguments that become the parameters, and inside here, again, think about, we're just going to iterate over. So const, again, very much like we did up here, but there'll be one very key difference, okay, of radio buttons. Okay, so so we're iterating over. So we're going to say if radio dot value triple equal to what we pass in. So whatever we're passing in, right, in that case, yep. What are we going to do? We're going to set radio dot checked equal true. So if we find a match, right, set radio dot checked equal to true. And in this case, right, we're not returning anything. We're just saying, hey, set it as true, and then break. Okay, because we have access here to the radio buttons, the reference itself, right, based on the fact that we set these up in the global module. Okay, now we have enough to test now to see if did you or I write some bad code here. And by the way, my objects now, and this is a little easier to see if you have your in-memory table render to have some different values besides the default values. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit edit here. Okay, good. So I find it. I found it. I got one. So that means this is indeed truthy, meaning that it runs. Right, now I'm going to call the to entry. I'm passing in. Cool. And now we should in a moment here, right? So we could look at that element to see that hidden element, and you'll see how we use this in a little bit. But now see, we can see this actually getting populated. So these references to the DOM.value are being set equal to whatever that object we passed in. So you can see 700, 200. Cool. And so now we're going to run this little helper function here. We're going to say value to set. It's passing it in. Okay. Let's see, did I do that? So it's looking at the first one. Good. So I can see I changed that one. Cool. So now we do the same thing for the food packaging. When it hits the condition, if they're equal, then it sets it. Okay, because again, what we're doing here is we're passing in. The radio is the input reference, the DOM reference itself. Okay, that's how we can set it inside this function. And then we're done. We come back here. Cool. And then we do the console log. We reset anything that may have gotten changed. And now, okay, now we at least have repopulated the form. Now there's more work to do here, but you can see where we're heading here, right? And again, think through what we're doing as far as leaning into what we've already written before in the table render, right? So we're leaning into that by calling the edit in the app.js and then letting it handle, or letting it call the form handler, because really the edit function is focused on repopulating the form. So this makes more sense from what its intended purpose, its module's purpose is to do. Okay, let's see, did I, on the form handler, oh, look at that. I had it in here and I forgot to do it. So, okay, I'm glad we got that one. Okay, so we're going to populate the form fields. This is in the populate edit here. So let's come down to here. Okay, give a little content, right? This function is used when the user hits the edit. Okay. And this is going to take in an object. Okay. So this is taking in the entry, which is an object. Okay, so then we store the unique, right? So this was this step. Well, matter of fact, let's see that because we actually didn't. So let's actually come down into here and we should see that input. Oh, actually it reset because I was still typing. So if we hit edit again, let's let it run. And we should be able to come back up here, hit inspect, and come into here, and we can now see that that set that unique ID for that input, which we'll lean into in a little bit. Okay, so we did that. Okay, helper function, we did this, so let's actually document that we did it right here. Good, right? This is taking in the node list, right? The list, the inputs. Remember that's, and if you're not sure what that means, is up here when we did the query selector all based on the diet type. Remember this returned an array-like object that we call a node list. Okay, so then it also takes in the value to set. Cool. Oh, good. So actually there was one more thing we're going to do here. It's good. See, that's the benefit of actually going back and looking at this. Oh, what was this one? Oh, did I set this one already? Yeah, no parameter, so we take in 2 parameters here. Cool, that's awesome. That's way awesome. Okay, so now that we've done that, actually we were not done. So we're gonna say that submit button reference we did, .text content. We're gonna say, so what we're doing here is we're saying this button says calculate. So now we're gonna change this text content to reflect to the user, hey, now say update entry, to help them understand what we're doing, right? To give them a visual clue on what that is. And actually probably be good to change the color of that as well to give them that. But we'll just go ahead and do a thing to output a form populated. How about form? Populated for editing entry ID. Cool. Okay, so now let's actually see it do the whole thing. We'll go here, we'll let it run. And then not only did it repopulate all that, oh, ID, where did I? Oh, right, right, right. Because in this case, the ID actually is setting on the entry. You know what, one other thing, and I didn't test this, so I'm going to test it right now. So I'm actually going to do, in this case, now we're actually next, and this is where we're heading next, is that we'll actually have to do a little more work because we have to figure out, in this case, we're going to edit the entry that's already in here, and how do we do that, right? But one of the things I wanted to check real quick, matter of fact, let me just back this out, and let's do another one. In this case, let's do apartment and see if that populates correctly as well. Let's let it run. Oh, it doesn't. Ooh, 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 ooh. Okay, I need to look at that, and I'll fix that on the next one. All right, we'll see you on the next. Oh, by the way, here's your commit message, is to populate the form when the edit is clicked. Ooh, actually, I don't think we can use quotes in there, so just edit is clicked.